My name is Augustus Thorne, and at 71 years old, I thought I understood the mechanics of the world. As a watchmaker, I spent my life with tiny gears and delicate springs, learning that every single piece, no matter how small, has a purpose. I believed the same was true of family. Last Christmas, I drove 12 hours through a blinding snowstorm, my arthritic hands screaming with every mile, all for the simple joy of seeing my only daughter, Annika. But as I stood on her doorstep about to knock, I heard my son-in-law say the words that would change everything. "I hope his car breaks down on the way back," he said, followed by my daughter's light laughter. "It would make executing the plan so much cleaner." They thought they were talking about a tired old man. They had no idea they were talking to a watchmaker, one who knows that for every action there is a precise and equal reaction. So I smiled, knocked on the door, and set my own plan in motion. Before I tell you what happened next, please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to show someone your true worth, hit that like button and subscribe, because this is a story you won't want to miss. The journey had been a long one. The 12th hour felt the same as the first, a cold, relentless ache that started in the knuckles of my hands and radiated up my arms. The old Lincoln's heater was fighting a losing battle against the Virginia blizzard, but the engine was steady, a faithful rhythm like an old escapement wheel marking time. The world outside was a swirling vortex of white, hypnotic, and dangerous, but inside there was purpose. On the passenger seat beside me, wrapped in a simple muslin cloth, was a small box I had finished last week. It was crafted from cedar wood that had aged in my workshop for 20 years, ever since my Serafina was still alive. The joints were dovetailed by hand, each one fitting so perfectly you couldn't slide a razor blade between them. It smelled of memory and patience. It was a gift for my daughter Annika, a piece of my soul carved from wood. That box and the hope of seeing her smile was the only thing that made the burning in my joints bearable. When I finally pulled into her long, pristine driveway, the house looked like a Christmas card, warm, bright, and impossibly perfect. I killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the throb in my hands, and I allowed myself a small, tired smile. I was here. I had made it. I gathered the gifts, holding the cedar box protectively in the crook of my arm, and made my way to the front door. The cold was biting, but through the large bay window I could see the glow of the fireplace and the silhouette of the Christmas tree. I heard laughter from within, a warm, inviting sound that promised an end to my long journey. I paused on the porch, my breath misting in the air, wanting to savor the feeling of arrival before stepping back into my role as dad. It was a moment of peace, a moment of illusion. And that's when the illusion shattered. The sound carried clearly through the cold, still air. It was my son-in-law, Trevor. His voice, usually so smooth and polished, was edged with a cynical amusement I knew all too well. 12 hours on the road, he said. Honestly, I hope his car breaks down on the way back. It would make executing the plan so much cleaner. There was a beat of silence, a space where my daughter could have defended me, could have said anything. Instead, a sound that broke something deep inside me. Annika, my only child, let out a light, tinkling laugh. "Trevor, stop it, that's terrible," she chided, but her tone held no force, only hollow amusement. It was the sound of agreement. The cedar box in my arm suddenly felt as heavy as a coffin. The cold I'd been fighting for 12 hours finally found its way past my coat, past my skin, and settled deep into my bones. For a moment I couldn't breathe. A mainspring in my chest, the one that had been ticking along reliably for 71 years, snapped. They weren't just hoping for a breakdown, they were hoping for an end that would make their plan cleaner. I didn't knock. Not yet. I took a slow, deliberate step back off the porch. I walked back to my car, the crunch of my boots on the fresh snow sounding unnaturally loud. I opened the driver's side door and closed it firmly, the solid thud echoing in the silent night. Then, composing my face into a mask of weary joy, I walked back to the door and knocked. It swung open to reveal Annika's bright, practiced smile. "Dad, you made it." "We were getting so worried," she exclaimed, hugging me. It felt like hugging a beautifully dressed mannequin. Trevor stood behind her, a hand on her shoulder, his face a perfect picture of concerned relief. "Gus, good to see you, man. That's some storm out there." "The old Lincoln still has some fight in her," I said, my voice a small miracle of steadiness. I stepped inside. The house was immaculate, decorated with the kind of minimalist, expensive taste that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It was a beautiful house, but there were no memories on the walls, no scuff marks from a childhood long past, no soul. After the hollow greetings, the awkward ritual of gift-giving began. I presented the cedar box to Anika. She turned it over in her hands, her manicured fingers tracing the joints. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something real crossed her face. I saw the little girl I remembered, the one who used to watch me for hours in my shop, her eyes wide with wonder as I brought tiny, intricate machines to life. "It's beautiful, Dad. Really classic," she said. She gave me a quick, distracted kiss on the cheek and placed the box on a crowded side table next to a sleek white box with a designer logo. It was immediately lost in the clutter of wealth. Trevor picked it up, weighing it in his hand as if judging a piece of fruit. "Solid craftsmanship, Gus," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You should sell these on Etsy. Might make you a few bucks for your bingo nights." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His words had triggered a memory so vivid it was like a phantom in the room. I saw my Serafina's face as clear as day. She was sitting on a stool in my workshop, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and varnish. She had touched a half-finished clock on my workbench, its tiny gears exposed like the ribs of a small mechanical creature. "The world runs on big, noisy gears, Augustus," she had said, her voice soft but sure. "But it's made of the tiny, precise ones that no one ever sees. That's where you live, in the heart of things." Trevor looked at a masterpiece of precision and love, and he saw a trinket for a flea market. He couldn't see the heart of things. He couldn't even see his own wife's. Dinner was a tense affair filled with Trevor's endless probing questions. They were disguised as casual conversation, but I knew what they were. They were an assessment. "How's the memory holding up? Gus, are you managing to keep track of all the bills? Okay. You know, my partner's father just had a fall. These big old houses can be a real liability. He was building a case, brick by brick, right there at the dinner table. And Anika just sat there pushing food around her plate, a silent accomplice to her father's character assassination. After the plates were cleared, they presented their gift to me. It was a sleek, expensive tablet in a stiff white box. "It's not just a tablet, Dad," Anika said, her voice unnaturally cheerful, as if trying to sell me something she didn't believe in herself. Trevor took over his salesman persona in full effect. He was in his element now. "It's pre-loaded with an app to manage your portfolio, Gus. In fact, my firm can take over management for you. We've been looking at your assets, the house, the savings, and frankly, they're underperforming, severely underperforming." He swiped a finger across the screen, showing me charts and graphs that were designed to confuse and intimidate. "We can optimize everything. Maximize your legacy. We just need you to sign the authorization. Think of it as us taking the burden off your shoulders." The word burden hung in the air between us. That's what I was. A collection of underperforming assets. A problem to be managed and optimized. A liability. I looked at Anika, searching her eyes for any sign of protest, any flicker of the daughter who once believed her father's hands could build magic. I found nothing but the reflection of the tablet's cold blue light. She wouldn't even meet my gaze. I took the device from Trevor's outstretched hand. The glass was cool and smooth beneath my calloused fingers. It felt weightless and dead compared to the living warmth of the cedar box. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet. "It's a very practical gift." The next morning I was gone before the sun came up. I left their perfect house without a sound, the same way I had arrived. But this time, I took their gift with me. I placed the tablet on the passenger seat right where the cedar box had been. The cedar box my soul carved from wood was now safely in the trunk. One was a weapon they had given me by mistake. The other was a weapon they had just tried to take, and I was now taking them both home. The long drive back home was a silent 12-hour meditation. The anger from that Christmas Eve had cooled, hardening into something dense and heavy like tempered steel. When I finally stepped back into my own home, the familiar scent of cedar, old books, and machine oil wrapped around me like a warm embrace. This house wasn't a magazine cover, it was a chronicle. Every scuff on the floor, every worn spot on the arm of my favorite chair was a chapter in the story of a life lived, a family raised, a love cherished. It was the complete opposite of my daughter's cold, perfect house. For a day, I did nothing. I let the silence of my home heal the raw edges of their words. I was hurt, yes, but underneath the hurt, a cold clarity was beginning to form. They hadn't just insulted me, they had revealed their strategy. And to defeat a strategy, you first have to understand it completely. That's when I remembered their gift, the tablet. I unboxed it, the sleek device, feeling alien in my workshop roughened hands. It was a tool of their world, not mine. But a tool is a tool, and I knew how to use them. Anika had set up an email account for me years ago on a service I never used. She said it was for emergencies. On a hunch, I powered on the tablet and logged into that old, forgotten account. It was mostly filled with digital cobwebs, old newsletters, and junk mail. But then I saw it. An email from 3 weeks ago. The sender was Trevor Hale. The subject line read, Greensboro Property Assessment. My heart began a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. It felt like the deliberate, powerful tick of a grandfather clock movement. I opened the email. The message was brief, cold, and corporate. See attached preliminary report for the asset at 1420 Sterling Drive. Let me know when you want to proceed to the next phase. The email was addressed to someone at an appraisal company. And at the bottom of the list of recipients was my own rarely used email address. A mistake. A careless, arrogant mistake. He had hit reply all. I clicked on the attachment, a sterile-looking PDF. The first page had a picture of my house taken from the street. It looked small and insignificant from that angle. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the cold, impersonal text. The report listed every room, its square footage, the estimated value of the land. It was a butcher's inventory of my life. Then I got to the addendum, workshop contents. My breath caught in my throat. I saw my tools, my life's work reduced to a series of bullet points. Antique watchmaker's lathe, functional but outdated, estimated value $50. $50. That lathe was my father's. He taught me my craft on it. I could still feel his hand guiding mine. Collection of assorted German hand tools, moderate wear, estimated value $75. Serafina had bought me those tools for our 10th anniversary, spending months saving up for them. Each one fit my hand like it was made for me. I read on each line a fresh cut. My drafting table, my collection of reference books, my specialized calipers and micrometers, all dismissed with pitiful, insulting numbers. They were stripping the soul from my sanctuary piece by piece and tagging it for a garage sale. I finally reached the last page, the one titled Conclusion and Recommendation. My eyes locked onto the final paragraph. I read it once, then twice, letting the words burn themselves into my memory. The primary asset value is in the real estate and the land it occupies. The current zoning presents an opportunity for redevelopment. The workshop contents are considered scrap or hobbyist materials with no significant commercial value. Scrap, hobbyist materials, no commercial value. I didn't yell, I didn't throw the tablet across the room. I gently placed it on my workbench with the precision of a watchmaker setting a final gear. The words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the room. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This wasn't about putting an old man in a home. This was about erasure. They had looked at my entire life, the sum of my knowledge, my passion, my art, the legacy I had built with these two hands, and they had declared it worthless, an obstacle to be cleared away. They had made a profound miscalculation. They thought they were appraising scrap metal. They had no idea they were dealing with tempered steel. The appraisal report lay on my workbench, its cold corporate words a death sentence for my life's work. But I knew it was only one piece of the machine. An appraisal is an opinion, a justification. It's not a weapon. My mind raced, sifting through the last few years, searching for the moment I had let my guard down, the constant questions about my memory, Anika's sudden insistence on helping with my bills, and then a memory surfaced, sharp and unsettling. Annika at my kitchen table last spring, a thick stack of papers in a neat manila folder. It's just a medical directive, Dad, she had said, her voice bright and reassuring. And a healthcare proxy, just standard stuff so we can help if anything ever happens. Trevor's lawyers drew it up. I remembered signing where she pointed my trust in her as automatic as breathing. A new kind of cold, far worse than the Christmas blizzard, washed over me. I walked from my workshop into the house, my steps heavy. I went to my old roll-top desk, the one I'd used for 50 years, and pulled open the bottom drawer. It was filled with files, each one neatly labeled in my own handwriting. Insurance, taxes, Serafina's will. And there it was, a folder labeled Medical Directive, 2024. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted it out. I sat down in my worn leather chair and opened it. The first few pages were exactly what I expected, dense with medical and legal language about life support and healthcare decisions. It all seemed normal. I kept turning the pages, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. And then I felt it. Tucked in the middle of the stack was a single page of heavier bond paper. The font was slightly different. It felt out of place. I pulled it out. The title at the top of the page was in stark, bold letters that seemed to shout at me, General Power of Attorney. I am not a lawyer, but I am a man who understands mechanics. I understand how one part grants power to another. I started to read, and the room began to feel small, the air thin. The words were a thicket of legal jargon, but phrases leaped out at me like coiled snakes. Hereby appoint Trevor Hale as my true and lawful attorney in fact, to have full power and authority to act on my behalf. In all financial matters, including but not limited to banking, real estate, and property transactions, to do and perform all and every act, as fully to all intents and purposes as I might or could do if personally present. A wave of dizziness hit me. For a moment I was 71 and terrified. This single piece of paper was a key that could lock me out of my own life. They could sell my house. They could empty my bank accounts. They could take everything I had ever built, and I had handed them the key myself. I saw Anika's face in my memory, smiling sweetly as she pushed the pen into my hand. Just sign at the bottom, Dad. The trust I'd had in that smile now felt like the most profound foolishness of my life. The fear quickly burned away, replaced by a hot volcanic anger. This wasn't a mistake. This was a conspiracy, a premeditated theft of a man's life planned by his own child. The appraisal wasn't just an insult, it was Exhibit A in their case against me, the justification they would use to prove I was incompetent and trigger this very document. The anger subsided, cooling into a sharp, terrifying clarity. I finally saw the whole machine. I saw all the gears turning together in perfect, cruel harmony. The constant questions about my health were designed to create a narrative of decline. The secret appraisal was meant to establish my assets as worthless junk, making their liquidation seem like a sensible act of tidying up. And this document, this power of attorney, was the master switch that would give them control of it all. It was the plan Trevor had talked about, a plan to erase me. I sat there in the quiet of my study, the incriminating paper in my hand. They thought they had built the perfect trap. But a watchmaker knows that even the most complex machine can have a flaw. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that I would find it. I would take their machine apart piece by tiny, wretched piece. I sat at my desk, the two documents laid out before me like evidence at a crime scene. Exhibit A was the appraisal, a cold-hearted obituary for my life's work. Exhibit B was the power of attorney, the legal weapon they had built to execute the sentence. For a long while I just looked at them, tracing the lines of text with my finger. The anger had passed, leaving behind a profound, chilling calm. A watchmaker doesn't get angry at a broken watch. He studies the mechanism, finds the flaw, and begins the patient work of repair. My family was a broken mechanism, and I was about to begin my work. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed a specific kind of tool, a specific kind of mind. I opened my old address book, its pages worn soft with age, and flipped to the back. There, under the heading Guild Contacts, was a name I hadn't thought of in years, Kendra James. Her father was a master clockmaker in Chicago, a man I had admired for decades. I had heard his daughter had become a lawyer, a brilliant one who specialized in the complex worlds of patents and intellectual property. A long shot, but she would understand the value of a craftsman's legacy. With a steady hand, I picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before a voice answered, a voice that was clear, confident, and cut straight to the point. Kendra James speaking. Ms. James. I began, my own voice sounding formal in the quiet room. My name is Augustus Thorne. I don't know if you'll remember me, but I knew your father Marcus through the National Watchmakers Guild. There was a slight pause on the other end. Augustus Thorne, she said, and I could hear the gears of her memory turning. The man who built the Serafina escapement. Of course I remember. My father considered you a legend. It's an honor, Mr. Thorne. What can I do for you? The acknowledgement, the simple respect in her voice was like a balm on a fresh wound. I took a deep breath. I need your help. I believe my daughter and her husband are attempting to take control of my assets, including my home and my life's work. I expected questions, perhaps even skepticism. Instead, I was met with a calm, professional silence that invited me to continue. So I did. I laid out the facts for her with the same precision I would use to describe a complex clock movement. I told her about the 12-hour drive, the conversation I overheard on the porch. I told her about the gift of the tablet and the push to have their firm manage my finances. I told her about the secret appraisal I had found, the one that had been accidentally sent to my old email address. I told her how it had dismissed the contents of my workshop. What were their exact words, Mr. Thorne? She asked, her voice sharp and focused. The conclusion stated, I said, reading directly from the report, workshop contents are considered scrap or hobbyist materials with no significant commercial value. I heard a soft but distinct sound on the other end of the line, a sharp intake of breath. It was the sound of professional outrage. I see, she said, her voice now edged with steel. And you mentioned a document they had you sign. Yes, I said, last spring. They told me it was a medical directive. I found it this morning. It's a general power of attorney granting my son-in-law full authority over all my financial and property matters. Mr. Thorne, Kendra said, and her tone was serious, direct. What you're describing is a classic textbook case of predatory financial planning and potential elder abuse. The narrative they're building, the appraisal, the power of attorney, it's all part of a well-worn playbook. Do you still have the original document? It's in my hand right now, I replied. Good, she said. Don't let it out of your sight. Now tell me, what is it you want to do? We can move to have the power of attorney invalidated based on fraudulent inducement. We can file a restraining order. There are defensive measures we can take immediately. I listened to her list the options, the legal shields I could raise. But a shield wasn't what I wanted. A shield is for a victim. I was done being a victim. I waited for her to finish, and then I said the words that had been forming in my mind ever since I read that appraisal. Those are the defensive measures, Ms. James. I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm interested in the offense. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat. They think my life's work is scrap metal. I believe it's time to show them its true market value. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a silence of confusion, but one of reassessment. I could almost hear her mind shifting gears, moving from a standard case of elder law to something far more interesting. When she finally spoke, her voice held a new note of excitement. Mr. Thorne, she said slowly, tell me more about your work. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told her about the Serafina escapement, and I told her about the old safe, the one my wife had insisted I keep, and the patents that lay sleeping inside. As I spoke, I felt the last of the fear and despair drain away, replaced by the steady, powerful rhythm of a machine that has just been set in motion. I had found my ally. The counterattack had begun. I placed the receiver back in its cradle with a soft, definitive click. The conversation with Kendra James had not given me peace, but something far more valuable, a direction, a purpose. My anger and grief were no longer just a storm inside me. They were fuel, and I now had an engine to put it in. I stood up from my desk, leaving the appraisal and the power of attorney behind. They were their weapons. It was time to unearth my own. I walked into my workshop, the heart of my home. My eyes passed over the lathe my father had used, the tools Serafina had given me, the half-finished movements on my bench. They were not scrap. They were soldiers in a silent army waiting for their general. I went to the far wall, the one lined with shelves holding old manuals and catalogs. I reached behind a row of thick leather-bound books and pressed a small, almost invisible knot in the wooden wall paneling. There was a soft click, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a cavity I had built myself 40 years ago. Inside, dark and silent, was an old iron safe. My fingers, stiff with arthritis, found their way to the combination dial. As I turned it, the familiar clicks echoing in the quiet room, a memory flooded back. It was Serafina standing right where I was now, her hands on her hips. I had just finished installing the safe. I had complained about the expense, the trouble. It's for the patents, Gus, she had insisted, her voice firm, but full of a warmth that could melt steel. You see gears and springs. I see a legacy. You never know when the world will need what's in that head of yours. A good idea needs a safe place to sleep. I had thought she was being dramatic. Now I understood she had been a prophet. The final tumbler fell into place. I pulled the heavy handle, and the iron door groaned open on its hinges, releasing the scent of old paper and 50 years of secrets. There was no money inside, no jewels. There was something far more precious. Stacked neatly on the single shelf were 4 thick leather-bound folios, their spines embossed with gold leaf lettering that had faded with time. I reached in and lifted one out. It was heavy, dense with the weight of ideas. I carried it over to my workbench and laid it gently under the bright, focused light of my task lamp. I untied the small leather strap and opened the cover. The pages were thick, almost like parchment. On the first page, in beautiful, precise calligraphy, was a title, "The Thorn Helical Escapement, U.S. Patent Number 4815123." And beneath it, a technical drawing so intricate and beautiful it looked like a work of art. My work of art. My fingers, the same fingers they saw as old and useless, traced the lines of the design. I turned the page and then another. Each one was a different patent, a different solution to a problem of time and motion that I had solved in this very room decades ago. The Serafina escapement, a self-lubricating gear train, a micro-barrel mainspring. My entire creative life was here bound in leather, stamped with the official seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. A slow smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of happiness, but one of profound, dawning realization. My daughter and her husband had appraised my workshop and found nothing of value. They had been looking for things they could sell. They had been looking for scrap. They never thought to look for treasure. They had no idea that the real worth of this room wasn't in the tools. It was in the ideas those tools had brought to life. Serafina was right. My ideas had been sleeping, and I was about to wake them up. A week later, I found myself in a world that was the complete opposite of my workshop. Kendra James's office was on the top floor of a modern glass building in downtown Greensboro. It was a space of clean lines, polished concrete floors, and quiet, ruthless efficiency. But on the wall behind her sleek desk, there was a massive, stunning photograph of the intricate inner workings of a grand complication clock. It was a nod to her heritage, a sign that she understood the world I came from. I placed the heavy leather-bound folios containing my patents on her glass desk. The solid, weighty sound they made seemed to anchor the room in a different, older reality. Kendra, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, didn't treat them like normal legal documents. She opened the first folio with a reverence I recognized the way a craftsman handles a rare piece of wood. Her sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the technical drawings, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine fascination. After a long, silent moment, she looked up at me, and I knew I had made the right choice. "My father was right," she said simply. "You're a legend, Mr. Thorne. These are not just patents. They are masterpieces of mechanical engineering." She closed the folio gently. "And they are going to be the heart of our strategy. But first we need to build a fortress, because your son-in-law is about to start a war." She leaned forward, all business now. "Let's talk about the 2 fronts of this battle. Defense and offense. Defense comes first. That power of attorney document is a loaded gun pointed at your head. Trevor's plan is clear. He will use the appraisal to argue that your assets are being mismanaged. He will use his manufactured concerns about your health to petition a court to declare you incompetent. If he succeeds, he can trigger the POA and take control of everything before we can even make a move." The words hung in the air, cold and terrifying. "So what do we do?" I asked. Kendra's expression was grim. "We don't give him a target to shoot at. Starting tomorrow, I am drafting the paperwork to place all of your current assets, your house, your savings, everything into a revocable living trust. It's a simple legal shield, but it makes it much harder for him to seize things quickly. But the most important part of the defense, Mr. Thorne, falls to you. And it's the hardest part." I waited. "You have to play the part they've written for you," she said, her eyes holding mine. "Trevor expects to see a confused, declining old man. You must give him one. When he calls, you will sound forgetful. When Anika asks about your health, you will be vague and tired. Let them think their plan is working perfectly. Let them get comfortable, let them get arrogant. We need them to underestimate you until the very last moment. Can you do that?" I thought of my daughter's laugh on that cold Christmas night. I thought of Trevor's smug, condescending voice. "Ms. James," I said slowly, "I have been a craftsman my whole life. I am very, very good at playing a part and holding a steady hand." A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. "Good. That's our defense. Now for the interesting part. The offense." Her energy shifted the air in the room, crackling with a new intensity. She tapped the stack of patents. "This is our cannon. Trevor thinks your life's work is scrap because he looks at it with the eyes of a banker. He sees old paper. I see the future. This helical escapement design, the low-friction properties and minimal power consumption could be revolutionary for drone technology. This self-lubricating gear train. It's a potential game-changer for medical micro-robotics. These aren't just watch parts, Mr. Thorne. They are solutions to some of the most complex engineering problems of the 21st century. She stood up and began to pace her mind, moving at a speed I could almost see. Here is what's going to happen. I am going to make some very quiet, very high-level inquiries. I have contacts at major tech firms and defense contractors. We will start by sending out non-disclosure agreements and preliminary technical data. This has to be a completely silent operation. Trevor cannot get a whisper of this. We will find a buyer, a licensee, who understands the true value of what is in these pages. We are not going to sell your legacy for pennies, Mr. Thorne. We are going to start a bidding war. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes blazing with intelligence and determination. They came to steal a small, quiet inheritance. We are going to build an empire they cannot even comprehend. It will take time. It will take patience. But I promise you this, when we are done, they won't just know your name. They will know its true market value. The first call came a week after my meeting with Kendra. I was in my workshop carefully cleaning a set of vintage watchmaking tools when the phone rang, its shrill sound an intrusion on my peaceful sanctuary. I saw Trevor's name on the caller ID. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and put on the mask. When I answered, my voice was a little shaky, a little frail. "Hello," I said, as if the phone were a strange and confusing object. "Gus, it's Trevor," he said, his voice slick and impatient. "How are you doing? I'm just calling to see how you're getting on with that tablet we got you. Did you manage to log into the financial portal yet?" I let a long pause hang in the air. The tablet," I asked, feigning confusion. "Oh, the black, shiny thing. Yes, it's very flat." I could hear him sigh, a sound of profound annoyance mixed with satisfaction. "Yes, Gus, it's flat. Have you turned it on? Have you looked at the application my firm uses?" I made a soft humming sound. I think I saw it this morning. It was on the kitchen counter. Anika told me not to put hot pans on the granite. It can crack, so it came in very handy for the bacon this morning. A fine little cutting board." The silence on the other end of the line was exquisite. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he processed what I'd said. He was weighing the absurdity of the statement against his preconceived notion of me as a senile old man. The notion he wanted to believe won out. "A cutting board," he finally said, his voice flat. "Okay, Gus, you know what? Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it later. You just take it easy." He hung up without saying goodbye. I placed the receiver down, my hand perfectly steady. The first gear of my own machine had just clicked into place. The next call a few weeks later was from Anika. I knew Trevor had put her up to it. Her voice was hesitant, tinged with a guilt she tried to hide. "Hi, Dad. I was just calling to check in. To make sure you remembered to pay the power bill." Trevor was worried about it. "The power bill," I said, letting my voice drift as if I were searching for a distant memory. "Oh, I thought you two were handling that now, since you're managing things." This was a small, deliberate probe, a test to see how she would react. She stammered for a moment. "No, Dad, you still have to pay them. We just help with the bigger picture." "The bigger picture," I repeated slowly. "Right. That reminds me of a fishing trip I took back in '83. The sky was so big that day. The biggest picture you've ever seen. We were out on the lake, me and my friend Joe, and the boat's engine died. We were stranded for hours, just floating. Joe was panicking, but I told him, you can't fix a stalled engine by yelling at it. You have to understand how it works. You have to be patient." "Dad," Anika said, her voice strained. "What does that have to do with the power bill?" "Oh, the bill. I'm not sure. I think I forgot the point," I said, my voice trailing off into a soft, confused mumble. "I'm sorry, dear. I'm a little tired today." After she hung up, a wave of profound sadness washed over me. It was one thing to deceive Trevor. He was the enemy. But lying to my daughter, hearing the pained frustration in her voice, felt like a betrayal in itself. I had to remind myself of Kendra's words. Let them think they're winning. This was a necessary pain, a strategic sacrifice to prevent a much greater loss. The final call of the month came from Trevor. All pretense of politeness was gone from his voice. He was in charge now. "Gus, I've scheduled a checkup for you with a new doctor. Dr. Evans. He specializes in geriatric care. His office is downtown. It's on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Annika will come pick you up." It wasn't a request, it was an order. This was the escalation Kendra had predicted. He was bringing in his own doctor to build his case for my incompetence. The old me would have argued, would have fought for my dignity. But the new me, the actor, simply sighed. "Oh, a doctor. Okay, son, if you think it's best. Tuesday, you said. I'll have to write that down. I'll be here on Thursday." "No, Gus," Trevor said, his voice slow and patronizing, the way you'd speak to a difficult child. "Not Thursday. Tuesday. Tuesday, 2 o'clock. Can you remember that?" "I'll try, son," I whispered. "I'll do my best." He hung up, and I was sure he was smiling, convinced he had just pushed the final decisive pawn across the board. I sat there in the silence of my workshop, the phone still in my hand. My face, which had been a mask of weary confusion, hardened. The mask was off. They had set the stage, arranged the actors, and written their script. They just didn't know that I was no longer reading from their pages. I was writing my own. The day the future arrived at my doorstep, it came in a silent black sedan that looked entirely out of place, parked next to my 50-year-old oak tree. 3 people emerged, 2 young men in identical dark polos and a woman who was clearly in charge. She was sharp-dressed in a practical but expensive pantsuit, her eyes scanning my small house with an unnerving analytical intensity. This was the engineering team from OmniGen Dynamics, the people Kendra had been courting for weeks. This was my one shot. I led them not into my home, but directly into my workshop. I saw the flicker of surprise in their eyes. They had likely expected a sterile lab or a modern office. Instead, they found themselves in a room that smelled of cedar and oil, a space filled with tools worn smooth by the hands of my father and myself. To them, I could see it was a museum, a relic. The lead engineer, a brilliant woman named Dr. Eris Vance, looked at the patent folios I had laid out on my workbench. She was polite, but I could feel the professional skepticism radiating from her. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice crisp, "your patents are theoretically fascinating, but the designs are over 30 years old. Our simulation suggests that while elegant, the energy efficiency couldn't possibly match modern micromagnetic solutions." The 2 young men nodded in agreement, fiddling with the laptops and sensitive monitoring equipment they had brought with them. I didn't argue. A watchmaker knows that words are cheap. Performance is everything. I walked over to a heavy canvas cloth in the corner of the shop and pulled it back. Underneath was my prototype. It was a complex lattice of brass and steel, a 3-dimensional manifestation of my helical escapement patent. It wasn't flashy. It was a dense, intricate machine, beautiful in its sheer complexity. The engineers exchanged skeptical glances. It looked like an antique. "This is the working model I built to test the design in 1988, I said quietly. I connected 2 simple wires from a small power source to the device. I flipped a switch. There was no sound, no hum, no whirring. But the machine came to life. Hundreds of tiny interlocking gears began to move, not in a chaotic spin, but in a slow, hypnotic, perfectly synchronized ballet. The movement was so fluid, so impossibly smooth, it felt less like a machine and more like something that had grown organically. The engineers immediately set to work attaching their sensors, their eyes glued to their laptop screens. The room was silent, except for the soft tapping of their keyboards. I simply stood back and let my work speak for itself. After a few minutes, one of the younger men let out a low whistle. "Eris, you need to see these energy consumption readings." Dr. Vance walked over and peered at his screen. Her professional composure finally cracked. A look of pure, unadulterated disbelief spread across her face. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Run the diagnostics again. There must be a sensor error." The other young man shook his head. "I'm running it live on my system too. The readings are accurate. The energy drain is almost zero. It's a 99.8% efficiency rate. I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Vance stared at my prototype, then back at her screen, then at me. The skepticism in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning, brilliant awe. She was no longer looking at a relic. She was looking at a revolution. And at that exact moment, that perfect moment of validation, my phone rang. The cheap, jarring ringtone cut through the focused silence of the workshop like a thrown rock. Everyone flinched. I pulled the phone from my pocket. The screen glowed with a name that made my blood run cold, Anika. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a test I hadn't prepared for. With the future of my legacy being decided 3 feet away from me, I had to once again become the man my daughter thought I was. I gave the engineers an apologetic look, walked to the far corner of the workshop and turned my back to them. I took a breath, summoned the frail, weary persona I had been perfecting for weeks, and answered. "Hello," I said, my voice thin and reedy. "Dad?" "It's me," Anika said. Her voice was laced with that patronizing cheerfulness she always used with me now. "I'm just calling to check on you. Did you have lunch today?" "Oh, Anika, dear," I said, letting my voice trail off. "Lunch. Yes, I think so. A sandwich, maybe?" It's hard to remember sometimes. I could feel the eyes of the engineers on my back. "Okay, Dad," she said, sighing. "Well, listen. I was just talking to Trevor, and we were wondering if you'd thought any more about letting us get some of those old things in your workshop appraised. You know, to see if they're worth anything." The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. I looked over my shoulder. Dr. Vance and her team were staring at my prototype with the reverence usually reserved for a holy object. Worth anything. "Oh, I don't know, dear," I said into the phone, my voice full of weary confusion. "There's just so much junk in here. Actually, you calling reminded me. Some men are here right now." Anika's voice sharpened instantly. "Men? What?" "Men, Dad." "Who's there?" I delivered the lie, the beautiful, perfect, two-faced lie that Kendra and I had rehearsed. "Oh, it's nothing to worry about. Just some men from the retirement home. The one you and Trevor picked out. They're just measuring the place to see how much of my old junk they'll have room for." There was a pause, and I could hear the relief in her voice when she spoke again. "Oh, okay, good, Dad. That's very responsible of you." "I tried, dear," I said. "I'm very tired now. I think I need to rest." We hung up. I stood there for a moment, my back still to the room, composing myself. I had passed the test. I turned around. Dr. Vance was looking at me, a strange, unreadable expression on her face. She had clearly overheard my side of the conversation. She gestured toward the silently spinning prototype. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice full of a respect that was entirely new. "That old junk of yours. It's not just a patent, it's a paradigm shift, and OmniGen Dynamics would like to be the first to invest in it." The weeks that followed the engineer's visit were the hardest. They were a test of pure, unadulterated patience, something a watchmaker is supposed to have in abundance. But this was different. I was waiting not for a gear to set, but for a life to reset. I spent the days in my workshop losing myself in the familiar, comforting discipline of my craft. I repaired an old regulator clock for the local library. I restored a pocket watch that had belonged to a soldier in the Second World War. I worked and I waited and I did my best not to think about the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of reassembling a particularly complex chronograph movement. My focus narrowed to a single tiny screw when the phone rang. I saw Kendra's name on the screen, and my hands for the first time that day felt unsteady. I took a breath, wiped the oil from my fingers, and answered. "Augustus," she said. There was no preamble. Kendra was not a woman who wasted time. I could hear a tightly controlled excitement in her voice, the sound of a well-executed plan coming to fruition. "I have news. OmniGen's board of directors held their final vote this morning. It was unanimous. They have approved the acquisition of the exclusive license for the Thorne patent portfolio." I closed my eyes. The tiny screw I had been holding in my tweezers fell silently onto the workbench. I managed to say, my own voice sounding distant. "They've sent the official offer letter," she continued, her voice crisp and clear. "It's in writing, it's signed, and it's ironclad. Augustus, the preliminary number is substantial. It's a life-changing figure. More than enough to secure your future, your legacy, and anything else you could possibly imagine." I was silent for a long moment, listening to the quiet ticking of the half-dozen clocks in my workshop. They had been ticking before the call, and they would be ticking long after. The money was abstract, a number on a page. But the sound of my work, the sound of my life that was real. "It was never about the money, Kendra," I said quietly. "It was about the value." "I know," she said, and I could hear her smiling. "And they have finally understood its value. The next step is the formal signing, which means it's time to proceed with the second part of our plan." After we hung up, I didn't move. I simply stood at my workbench, the silence of the room settling around me. All the tension, the waiting, the uncertainty of the past few weeks seemed to dissolve, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep relief. I reached for the small, silver-framed photograph I always kept on my bench. It was Serafina, smiling, her eyes full of a light that had never really left me. I traced the line of her cheek with my thumb. "We did it, my love," I whispered to the quiet room. "They see it now. They finally see the value." I placed the photograph back in its spot with a steady hand. The relief I felt was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of the final act. The foundation was set. The cannon was loaded. Now it was time to set the trap. My face, which had softened with the memory of my wife, hardened once more into a mask of cold, unwavering resolve. Now for the final performance. The next move in their game came not as a phone call but as a knock on my door. Trevor's plan had escalated. Standing on my porch was a man in a gray suit with a tired face and a heavy leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Dr. Finch, a geriatric specialist Trevor had engaged to perform a standard wellness assessment. I knew exactly what he was. He was not a doctor sent to heal, he was an inspector sent to condemn. He was the tool Trevor was using to try and prove I was incompetent. Kendra had warned me this was coming. I invited him in, playing the part of a slightly confused but agreeable old man. We sat in my living room, the space filled with the comfortable ghosts of my life with Serafina. Dr. Finch, however, seemed to see none of it. He saw only a subject. He opened his briefcase and took out a clipboard and a series of laminated cards. The assessment began. It was a cold, clinical process, a series of questions and tests designed to probe the dark corners of an aging mind for any signs of weakness. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice a detached monotone, "I'm going to give you 5 words. I want you to repeat them back to me now, and then I will ask you for them again in a few minutes. The words are Apple River Penny Table Monkey." I repeated them back flawlessly. He made a small tick on his form. He then asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s. I did so, my voice even and steady, pausing only once as if to gather my thoughts, just as Kendra and I had rehearsed. He asked me to draw the face of a clock showing the time as 10 past 11. I drew a perfect circle, placing the numbers with the precision of a man who has spent a lifetime mastering time itself. I could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He held up a card. "What do a watch and a ruler have in common?" he asked. I allowed myself a small, soft smile. He had unknowingly stepped into my world. "They are both instruments of measurement," I said. "One measures a journey through time, the other a journey through space. Both impose order on chaos. Both tell us where we are, where we have been, and how far we have to go. And both, if not properly cared for, can be made to lie." Dr. Finch stared at me for a long moment, his pen hovering over the paper. He seemed momentarily thrown off his script. He simply cleared his throat and made another note. The rest of the tests continued in the same fashion. I answered every question, solved every small puzzle, and recalled the 5 words perfectly when he asked for them again. I did not ace the test like a cocky student. I passed it like a healthy 71-year-old man with a sharp mind, which is exactly what I was. With every correct answer, I could feel the doctor's professional detachment solidifying. I was not the easy case he had been paid to document. Finally, he packed his briefcase, his face an unreadable mask. "Well, Mr. Thorne," he said, standing to leave, "your cognitive functions appear to be well within the normal range. I will send my full report to Mr. Hale." The moment the front door closed behind him, I walked to the phone. It was already ringing. I let it ring twice more before picking it up. It was Trevor. His voice was tight, stretched thin over a core of pure rage. "What did you do, Gus?" he demanded without even a hello. I feigned a weary confusion. "I'm not sure what you mean, son. There was a doctor here. A Dr. Finch. He asked me a great many questions." I know that Trevor snapped. "I just got off the phone with him. He said you were remarkably lucid." He spat the words out as if they were poison. I let a moment of silence pass, then delivered the final gentle turn of the screw. "Oh," I said, my voice full of innocent relief. "Well, that's good news, isn't it? Did I pass?" The failure of Dr. Finch's assessment was not an end, but an escalation. Trevor had tried to use a scalpel to surgically remove my legal competence and had failed. Now he reached for a bludgeon. And the bludgeon, as always, was my daughter. The call came that evening. I knew from the sound of her first choked sob that Trevor had spent the afternoon poisoning her mind, twisting my small victory into an act of senile defiance. Dad. Anika's voice was thick with tears. Why are you doing this? I sat down heavily in my leather armchair, the receiver feeling like a lead weight in my hand. I continued the performance, my own voice weary and thin. Doing what, dear? I'm not doing anything. You are, she cried, her voice cracking. You're fighting us. You're fighting Trevor. He is trying so hard to help you to secure your future, our future, and you're making it impossible. That doctor was one of the best in his field. And Trevor said you treated him like a game. Don't you trust me? Don't you trust us? Every word was a carefully chosen dart dipped in guilt and aimed directly at my heart, and every word I knew had been loaded into the chamber by her husband. I thought of Kendra's advice. You have to let them think they're winning. It was time for the final, most painful part of my performance. It was time to break. I'm just tired, Anika, I whispered, letting a lifetime of weariness seep into my voice. I'm just so tired. We're trying to take the burden off you, Dad, she pleaded, her voice softening now that she sensed a crack in my defenses. Trevor's fund is one of the best. He's a genius at this. He just wants to make sure you're taken care of, that your legacy is protected. Don't you want to see me happy? Don't you want to see your family secure? This is what's best for everyone. Your legacy. The word was a bitter irony. She had no idea what my legacy truly was. I need to think, dear, I said, my voice barely audible. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I sat there in the silence, the echo of my daughter's tears filling the room. This was the true cost of my war. To save her from the man she had married, I had to let her break my heart. I had to let her believe I was the villain in her story. I looked at the silver-framed photograph of Serafina on the mantelpiece. Her smile was a beacon of strength. She had always known what I was capable of. It was time I showed everyone else. I picked up the phone again. I didn't call Anika back. I called her husband. Trevor answered on the first ring, his voice wary and sharp. Gus. You win, son, I said. My voice was hollow, stripped of all its fight. It was the voice of a man who had finally surrendered. There was a stunned silence on the other end. He hadn't expected it to be this easy. What did you say? I said you win, I repeated, letting out a long, shaky sigh. Anika called me. I can't be the reason she's unhappy. You're right. I'm too old for this. I'm too tired to fight you anymore. You want to manage things, fine. Manage them. You want me to sign the papers, fine. Tell me when and where. I could hear the slow smile spreading through his voice. It was the sound of pure, undiluted triumph. Well, Gus, I'm glad you've finally seen reason. This is for the best. You'll see. I'm sure I will, I said. There's just one thing. His voice became cautious again. What thing? This was it. The moment. The delivery of the bait had to be perfect. I want everything to be clean, Trevor. Tidy. No loose ends for Anika to deal with after I'm gone. I paused, then continued, my voice full of the rambling logic of a tired old man. My workshop, that appraiser you sent, said it was all junk, and he was right. It's just a lifetime of clutter. But there are some old papers in the safe. Patents from years ago. They're worthless, I know, just dusty old ideas. But they're officially registered with the government and all that. I want to add them to the portfolio we're signing over to you. I want it all in one place. Just to be tidy. I held my breath. I had presented the crown jewels of my life's work as a dusty afterthought, a bit of bureaucratic housekeeping. The sound that came through the receiver was exactly what I had hoped for. A short, condescending chuckle. Patents. Trevor said, the amusement evident in his voice. Sure, Gus. Whatever you want. We can add your little blueprints to the pile. It doesn't matter what's in the portfolio as long as you sign the authorization to manage it. Thank you, son, I said, my voice full of pathetic gratitude. That takes a great weight off my mind. Don't mention it, he said, his voice magnanimous in victory. I'll have my assistant schedule the signing. It's good to finally have you on board. He hung up the phone, a conquering hero. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand as steady as a surgeon's. My face, which had been a mask of heartbreaking defeat, was now completely blank. The bait was not just taken. It had been swallowed whole. The call came 2 days later. It was Trevor, and his voice had changed completely. The anger and impatience were gone, replaced by a smooth, magnanimous tone, the voice of a king speaking to a freshly conquered subject. He was enjoying his victory. "Gus," he said, the false warmth in his voice making my skin crawl. "Good news. I had my assistant schedule the signing. We're all set for next Friday at 10 a.m. at the lawyer's office downtown. We'll be in and out in 15 minutes. Nice and simple. Nice and simple." He wanted to finalize the theft of my life's work in a sterile, anonymous office, a 15-minute transaction like buying a used car. He wanted to erase me quietly. I took a slow breath, summoning the character I needed to play one last time, the proud, defeated patriarch. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. The line went silent. Trevor was not expecting resistance. "No," he repeated, a hint of his old annoyance creeping back in. "What do you mean, no?" "You agreed, Gus. We had a deal." "I agreed to sign the papers, son," I said, and I let a weary sadness into my voice. "And I will, but not there. Not in some stuffy lawyer's office. It feels grubby, like some kind of back-alley deal being done in the shadows. My life's work, the home I built with Serafina. It may not be worth much in your world, Trevor, but it is worth more than that." Trevor sighed, a sound of pure frustration. "Gus, this is how these things are done. It's a standard legal procedure. It doesn't need a parade." "Perhaps not," I said, "but it needs a little dignity. If I am to sign away my legacy, if I am to formally hand over the financial well-being of my family to you, then I will not do it in a place of insignificance. I will do it in a place that matters." I let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the hook, the bait designed specifically for the ego of a man like him. "I will do it at your firm, Trevor. In your boardroom." He was silent again, and I could picture his mind working, trying to understand my angle. "My boardroom?" he asked, suspicion lacing his voice. "Why on earth would you want to do that?" I let out a soft, sad chuckle. "Because I need to see it," I said, my voice now full of a carefully crafted vulnerability. "I need to see what you have built. I need to see the proof that my daughter is in good hands. I want to meet your partners. I want to look the men who will be managing what little I have in the eye. You talk about my legacy, Trevor. Well, you are my legacy now. Your success is my success. If I am to pass the torch, then let me do it properly. Let me see the kingdom I am leaving behind." It was a masterful performance, if I did say so myself. I had framed his predatory takeover as a noble succession, a coronation. I had turned his boardroom from a place of business into a throne room where he would receive his inheritance. "That's highly unusual, Gus," he said, but the suspicion in his voice was being replaced by a new, intrigued tone. He was picturing it, the old man humbled, formally bestowing his life's work upon him in front of his admiring colleagues. A public spectacle of his triumph. "It is the last thing I will ask of you, son," I said, my voice dropping to an almost whisper full of pathetic, misplaced pride. "Annika, she begged me to trust you." She cried. "I am doing this for her, so please allow me this one small courtesy. Let an old man feel like he is leaving his house in order. Let me have my dignity." That was the final key. The combination of his ego and my supposed concern for dignity was too much for him to resist. He saw a pathetic old man trying to create a moment of ceremony to soothe his wounded pride. He saw a harmless request that would ultimately make his victory even sweeter. "All right, Gus," he said, finally, the magnanimous king once more. "All right. If it means that much to you, you can come to the boardroom. I'll have my assistant clear my schedule for Friday. 10 a.m. "Thank you, Trevor," I said, my voice full of gratitude. "That takes a great weight off my mind." "Don't mention it," he said. "Just be ready to sign." He hung up. I placed the receiver down. The performance was over. My face, a mask of weary resignation just moments before, was now as cold and hard as the steel of a mainspring. He thought he was arranging a surrender. In truth, he had just agreed to attend his own execution, and he had let me choose the time, the place, and the audience. The evening before the signing, the city lights outside Kendra James's office window seemed to hold their breath. The usual noise of the downtown streets was a distant, muffled hum. Inside, a tense, focused silence filled the room. Spread across her large glass desk were the fruits of our silent war. The final multi-million-dollar contract from Omnigen Dynamics. The meticulously drafted charter for the Serafina and Augustus Thorne Foundation for Young Innovators. Kendra was reading through them one last time, her highlighter making soft, crisp sounds as she marked key passages. She was in her element, the general reviewing the final battle plans. I sat across from her, the legal documents a blur in front of me. I trusted her work. My own preparation was of a different kind. From the vest pocket of my suit, I carefully took out an old silver pocket watch. It had been my father's and the first complex movement I had ever successfully restored. The silver was tarnished with age, the crystal spiderwebbed with a lifetime of faint scratches. It was a map of a life, and its heart was still beating strongly. I took a soft polishing cloth from my jacket and began to work. My movements were slow, methodical, the same ones I had used 1,000 times on 1,000 different timepieces. I polished the ornate case, watching as the dull silver began to gleam under the lamplight. My mind was not on the millions of dollars on the table or the legal jargon in the documents. It was on the mechanism within the watch. I thought of the mainspring coiled tight with potential energy. I thought of the escapement, the tiny, brilliant heart that controls the release of that power, ensuring it is used not in a single chaotic burst, but in a precise, measured, and unstoppable progression. Our plan was like this watch. Trevor's greed was the mainspring. Kendra was the escapement. And I was the watchmaker, the one who had assembled all the pieces and was about to set them in motion. "Everything is in order," Kendra said, finally looking up from the papers. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were bright with a fierce intensity. "The Omnigen contract is ironclad. The Foundation charter is legally untouchable the moment you sign it. Once you do, not even a court order could give Trevor or Anika access to a single penny." I looked up from the watch, its silver surface now glowing warmly. "Every gear is in its place," I said quietly. She studied my face. "Are you ready for this, Augustus?" I finished my work, the watch gleaming as if it were new. I wound the crown, and I could feel the faint, satisfying clicks of the mainspring tightening. I held it to my ear and listened to its strong, steady heartbeat. A perfect, unwavering rhythm. Then with a soft final click, I closed the silver case. The time for preparation was over. I slipped the watch back into my pocket. "I've been ready for this my whole life," I said. "It's just a matter of time." The boardroom at Hale Capital was less of an office and more of a monument to arrogance. It was a cold, glass-walled cage on the 30th floor with a panoramic view of the city spread out below like a kingdom. A long, dark, impossibly polished table reflected the gray morning sky, and on the far wall a piece of abstract art made of twisted metal looked like a car crash frozen in time. This was Trevor's world, a world of surfaces, not substance. My lawyer Kendra James and I were seated on one side of the table, our files arranged in a neat, unassuming stack. We were an island of quiet purpose in an ocean of smug victory. Trevor sat at the head of the table, a king upon his throne. He was flanked by two of his partners, younger, leaner versions of himself, all wearing the same expensive suit and the same predatory smile. They looked at me with a polite, dismissive pity, the way you might look at a family heirloom right before you sell it for scrap. They saw a defeated old man, a final piece of paperwork, the last boring step in a profitable acquisition. They had no idea they were the ones being acquired. But my eyes were on my daughter. Anika sat beside her husband, a ghost at the feast. She looked small and lost in her expensive silk blouse. She wouldn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the polished surface of the table, her hands twisting a diamond ring on her finger around and around. While her husband and his partners radiated a smug, triumphant confidence, Anika was a knot of pure anxiety. She knew on some deep, instinctual level that she had been suppressing for years, that something was profoundly wrong. She could feel the vibration of a gear slipping somewhere deep inside the machine of her life. I, on the other hand, felt a calm I hadn't known in months. The time for anger, for grief, for performance was over. I was no longer the frail man on the phone or the heartbroken father. In this room, I was simply a watchmaker. I observed the mechanism in front of me, noting its flaws. I saw Trevor's arrogance, his partner's greed, my daughter's weakness. I saw the overconfidence that made them blind. My face was a mask of placid grandfatherly calm, but behind my eyes my mind was cold and clear, calculating the precise moment to act. Kendra sat beside me, a picture of professional composure. Our silence was a weapon they didn't even recognize. The final pieces were on the board, and my opponents had no idea the game had already been lost. Trevor cleared his throat, a small, self-important sound that echoed in the silent boardroom. He beamed at his partners, then looked down the long table at me, his face a perfect mask of benevolent authority. He had his audience. The performance was about to begin. Well, now that everyone's here, he started, his voice smooth as polished glass. I'd like to officially welcome my father-in-law, Augustus Thorne. We're here today to complete a simple but important formality. Gus, as you know, has built a commendable legacy through a lifetime of hard work and prudence. And now, in his well-deserved retirement, he has wisely decided to pass the torch to allow us at Hale Capital to professionally manage and optimize his assets, ensuring that his legacy not only remains secure, but grows for generations to come. He spoke about me as if I were already a ghost, a historical footnote in his own brilliant story. His partners nodded along, their expressions, bored but appreciative. They had seen this show before. It was the Trevor Hale special, turning a hostile takeover into an act of charity. We'll be unlocking the hidden value in his real estate portfolio. Trevor continued a euphemism for selling the house Serafina and I had built and reallocating his traditional underperforming savings into some of our more aggressive high-yield funds. He was talking about my life savings, the money I had earned over 50 years of patient, meticulous work, as if it were a lazy employee he was about to fire. He picked up a heavy leather-bound folder and slid it down the polished table. It stopped directly in front of me with a soft final thud, the sound of a closing door. Inside, I knew, was the power of attorney and the asset management agreement, the legal instruments of my erasure. This is a great day for our family, Trevor said, his eyes gleaming with a victor's light. He looked at me, his smile wide and condescending. We're all very proud of you for making this smart, responsible decision, Gus. He pushed a ridiculously expensive fountain pen towards me. So if you'll just sign on the last page, we can make it official. This was the moment, the peak of his arrogance, the culmination of his plan. I looked at the signature line. I could feel my daughter's anxious gaze on me. I could feel Trevor's smug impatience. I picked up the heavy pen, and then a new voice cut through the air, calm, clear, and perfectly timed. "Excuse me, Trevor," Kendra, James said. Trevor's smile faltered. He was not used to being interrupted, especially not at the climax of his own performance. "Yes, Ms. James." "As you can see, we're in the middle of a signing. I understand," Kendra said, her voice polite but unyielding. "But before Mr. Thorne signs that document, there is just one small piece of housekeeping we need to address. A final asset that needs to be formally included in the portfolio before management is transferred." Trevor let out an annoyed sigh. He glanced at his partners as if to say, "Can you believe this old-timer nonsense, Ms. James? I'm sure we can handle any minor details later. It's all just part of the estate." "I'm afraid not," Kendra said, her voice losing none of its calm authority. "My client was very specific about this point, as you'll recall from his phone call. He wanted to ensure there were no loose ends." She looked directly at Trevor, her gaze unwavering. "We need to formally add his patents to the asset list." Trevor actually laughed a short dismissive bark. "The patents? You mean his old blueprints? I already told him that's fine. We can throw the folder in the box with the rest of it. It's sentimental junk. It has no bearing on the financial agreements." He waved his hand dismissively. "Now, Gus, if you'll just sign—" "I'm afraid it does have a bearing," Kendra said, her voice still quiet, but now it carried an edge that made everyone at the table sit up a little straighter. "Because you see, Trevor, that sentimental junk is no longer a passive asset. It's an active one, and it was recently the subject of an acquisition." A wave of confused silence washed over the boardroom. Trevor stared at Kendra, his brain failing to compute her words. His partners exchanged questioning glances. The carefully constructed reality of his victory was beginning to fracture at the edges. "An acquisition," Trevor repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. He forced a laugh, a hollow, ugly sound. "What are you talking about? An acquisition of what? A box of old springs and gears? Who would possibly acquire that?" Kendra James didn't answer him. Instead, she looked at me and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was my cue. "My son-in-law is a busy man," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "Perhaps it's best if the acquiring party speaks for themselves." Kendra smiled faintly. "I agree," she said. "Trevor, with your permission, of course. The CEO of the corporation is waiting on a conference call to finalize the agreement." Trevor was cornered. In front of his partners, he couldn't possibly refuse. To do so would make him look weak, like he was afraid of what might be said. The arrogance that had been his driving force now became the bars of his own cage. "Fine," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand toward the large video screen on the wall. "Let's not waste any more time on this nonsense. Put them on." Kendra simply tapped a key on her laptop. The Hale Capital logo on the screen dissolved, replaced instantly by two faces in a different, brighter boardroom. I recognized Dr. Eris Vance immediately. Beside her was a sharp, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit. The nameplate on the screen read, "Robert Chen, CEO, OmniGen Dynamics." Chen's face was all business. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a powerful, quiet authority. "We are here to confirm the final details of our agreement with Mr. Augustus Thorne. As per the contract reviewed by both our legal teams, OmniGen Dynamics is pleased to finalize our acquisition of the exclusive license for the entire Thorne patent portfolio." One of Trevor's partners leaned forward, looking utterly baffled. "The what portfolio? I'm sorry, who is this?" Chen raised an eyebrow, unused to being questioned. "This is the portfolio of micromechanical designs created by Mr. Thorne. And as for who I am the man who is about to make him an exceedingly wealthy one." He looked down at a paper in front of him. "The deal, as agreed, consists of an upfront payment to Mr. Thorne of $8 million. The sound of that number, $8 million, landed in the silent room like a physical blow. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the glass cage. The smug, bored expressions on the faces of Trevor's partners vanished, replaced by masks of stunned disbelief. But Chen wasn't finished. "And," he continued, "it includes ongoing royalties from the technology's application in our next generation of surgical robotics, which our R&D department projects will exceed $50 million over the next decade." $50 million. And that is when the world broke. I watched it happen, as if from a great distance. I saw the smug, triumphant smile on Trevor's face freeze. It didn't just disappear, it shattered like a reflection in a dropped mirror. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen. His mouth hung slightly open. His eyes, which had looked at me with such pity and condescension, were now wide with a horror so profound it was almost comical. He looked from the screen to Kendra to me, his mind utterly incapable of processing the reality of what he was hearing. The sentimental junk he had laughed at, the little blueprints he had dismissed, were worth more than his entire company. His partners were no longer looking at him with admiration. They were looking at each other, their faces a mixture of panic and fury. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. This wasn't just a missed opportunity. This was a catastrophic failure of judgment. The man they had trusted to be a shark had revealed himself to be a fool who had thrown away a treasure. I heard one of them whisper to the other, his voice a venomous hiss. "Did you know about this? Did you have any idea?" The foundation of Trevor's kingdom was cracking right under his feet. Then there was Anika. The numbers, the millions, they were just abstract sounds to her. But the look on her husband's face was not. She stared at him, and I saw the exact moment her entire life became a lie. The brilliant, powerful man she had admired, the man for whom she had sacrificed her relationship with her father, was suddenly revealed to be a small, arrogant, and breathtakingly stupid gambler who had just lost everything. She saw the truth. She had dismissed her father's entire life as worthless junk, and that junk was the foundation of a $50 million empire. A strangled sob escaped her lips. She covered her mouth with her hand, her entire body shaking with the force of her realization. It was the sound of a heart, a life, and a future all breaking at once. One of Trevor's partners, his voice trembling slightly, finally spoke to the screen. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, could you repeat those figures?" Chen looked at him without blinking. $8 million up front," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, driving the nail deeper. "And a projected $50 million in royalties." I looked at my daughter, my poor broken daughter, and felt no triumph, only a deep and profound sorrow. I looked at Trevor, a man so utterly destroyed he couldn't even speak. I had not come here for revenge. I had come here for a simple course correction, and the beautiful, intricate, and terrible machine of truth was now working perfectly. Into the wreckage of that stunned silence, Kendra James made the final decisive move. While Trevor stared blankly at the screen and his partners whispered frantically amongst themselves, she reached into her briefcase and produced another document. It was bound not in corporate leather, but in a simple, elegant dark blue cover. She placed it on the table in front of me with a soft, definitive sound that cut through the chaos. It landed directly on top of the useless asset management agreement Trevor had pushed at me moments before. I looked at the cover. In simple gold leaf it read, "The Serafina and Augustus Thorne Foundation for Young Innovators." It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I pushed Trevor's contract aside with the back of my hand, dismissing it like the piece of trash it was. From my inside jacket pocket I produced my own pen, an old fountain pen with a gold nib that Serafina had given me on my 30th birthday. I uncapped it, the motion slow and deliberate. The sound of my pen scratching across the signature line was the only sound in the entire boardroom. It was the sound of a new reality being written. It was the sound of a legacy being reclaimed and redirected. I signed my name, and with that single motion, 50 years of my past and 100 years of my future were secured. I capped the pen and laid it to rest next to my signature. Then I stood up. I was no longer the guest in their boardroom. I was the authority. I looked down the long, polished table, my gaze finally settling on my daughter and the man she had married. My voice was not loud, it was not angry, it was not triumphant. It was the calm, clear voice of a watchmaker stating a simple, mechanical fact. The foundation is now the sole beneficiary of the OmniGen contract and of my entire estate. Effective immediately, I said. Its mission is to provide scholarships and seed funding for young, underprivileged students in engineering, robotics, and the mechanical arts. I paused, letting the words sink in. I looked at Anika, whose tear-streaked face was now looking up at me in dawning horror. I looked at Trevor, a hollowed-out shell of a man. And I added, delivering the final, killing blow. There is one very specific, non-negotiable clause in the Foundation's charter. A clause my late wife would have insisted upon. It states that no family member by blood or by marriage, past or present, can ever be a beneficiary, a board member, or an employee of the Foundation in perpetuity. That was it. The final gear clicking into place. The final irreversible severing. I saw the last flicker of desperate, calculating hope die in Trevor's eyes. He slumped in his chair utterly and completely defeated. But the real devastation was on my daughter's face. She finally understood. It was not just about the money. She had not just lost an inheritance. She had been written out of her own history, erased from the legacy she had so carelessly helped to destroy. Her quiet, desperate sobs were the only sound as the new, unshakable order of my world settled into place. I didn't look back. As Kendra and I walked out of that glass-walled boardroom, the last sound I heard was the raw, broken sobbing of my daughter. It was a sound of a world ending. The elevator doors slid shut, encasing us in a quiet, neutral space, and as we descended, I felt the weight of the last 71 years begin to lift. I was not leaving a fortune behind me in that room. I was leaving a prison. Kendra placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of respect and victory. We stepped out into the lobby and walked into the rest of my life, leaving the chaos and the wreckage for others to clean up. That was 6 months ago. The winter of my grief has given way to a summer of new beginnings. My workshop is different now. The air is still filled with the scent of cedar and oil, but now it's also filled with new sounds, the eager questions of a young mind and the bright spark of laughter. Her name is Maya, a brilliant 17-year-old from the neighborhood who has a mind for mechanics like none I've ever seen. This afternoon, I was showing her how to restore an antique clock movement on my father's old lathe. Her hands, though young, were steady and sure. She had the touch. After a while, I told her to stop. I wiped my hands on a cloth and picked up an envelope from my workbench. It was embossed with the logo of the Foundation, 2 interlocking gears forming a heart. "This is for you," I said. "It's the very first scholarship from the Serafina and Augustus Thorne Foundation. It will cover your entire tuition for your engineering degree at the university." Her eyes wide with disbelief filled with tears. But these were not the tears of loss I had heard in that boardroom. These were the tears of a future suddenly impossibly being born. As she went back to work on the lathe, her face a perfect picture of concentration and joy. I looked at the small, silver-framed photograph of my Serafina. My legacy was not the $8 million in a bank account. It wasn't the $50 million in royalties to come. My true legacy was this single precious moment. the quiet hum of the lathe, the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next, and the limitless potential of a brilliant mind being given its first chance to fly. I had not just saved my past. I had finally invested in the future. This whole ordeal taught me a painful but powerful lesson. My own family looked at my life's work, the very essence of my soul, and saw only worthless scrap metal. For a time, their judgment cast a long shadow, making me doubt the value of my own hands. But I learned that true worth is not defined by the opinions of those who refuse to see. It is forged in the quiet hours of dedication and passion. They were measuring with the wrong ruler, looking for value they could liquidate, not value that could be created. My legacy was never the money, it was the knowledge. And by letting go of the family I thought I had, I was able to build a new one founded on the principle of sharing that knowledge with the future. Let me know in the comments below, what is a skill or passion of yours that you believe is priceless no matter what anyone else thinks.